The moment my fingers hovered over the cancel transfer button, a lifetime of memories flashed before my eyes. Every birthday cake I'd baked, every late night spent helping with science projects, every college tuition check I'd written, all leading to this moment of reckoning. The screen glowed accusingly in my dimly lit study as rain pattered against the windows of my Rose Hill estate. With one simple click, I would unravel the safety net I'd spent decades weaving for my only son. My hand trembled, not from age as Alaric assumed, but from the magnitude of what I was about to do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pressed the button. $2. $7 million would not be transferred to Lumina Biotechnologies. My son's dream company would not launch next week. And for the first time in my 67 years, I felt the exhilarating lightness of putting myself first. My name is Alara Blackwood, and until 6 months ago, I was the invisible force behind one of the country's most successful pharmaceutical companies. As the founder and CEO of Meridian Therapeutics, I'd built an empire from a tiny research lab in my garage to a multi-billion-dollar corporation that had revolutionized diabetes treatment. When I sold the company last year for $230 million, I thought I'd finally earned my peace. Mornings in my garden, afternoons at my pottery wheel, evenings with classic novels I'd put off reading for decades. What I didn't anticipate was becoming my son's personal bank. Alaric had always been ambitious. Even as a child, he wasn't content with a lemonade stand. He wanted a lemonade franchise. When other teenagers got summer jobs at the mall, he started a lawn care service that employed half the neighborhood kids. I admired his drive. It reminded me of myself at his age. Before I'd become pregnant with him at 22, I'd been on track to become the youngest research director at Fairview Pharmaceuticals. His father, Dominic, hadn't wanted children so early in our careers, but I'd been determined to have both, a family and professional success. When Dominic walked out on us, claiming I was too ambitious for a mother, I doubled down on proving him wrong. I worked night shifts in labs while completing my PhD, hired reliable sitters, and read bedtime stories to Alaric over video calls when I traveled for conferences. It wasn't traditional motherhood, but I made sure he never lacked for anything, especially opportunities. Perhaps I overcompensated. While other parents gave their children weekly allowances, I funded Alaric's first business when he was 16, a custom computer building service that netted him enough to buy his first luxury car before college. When his tech startup failed after graduation, I covered his debts without question. When he married Nisa, an interior designer with expensive taste, I gifted them a waterfront condo in Azure Bay as a wedding present. "You're investing in greatness, Mom," he'd always say, his charismatic smile melting any concerns I might have voiced. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The afternoon that changed everything was unremarkable in every way. Spring sunshine filtered through the cherry blossoms outside my home office window. Cervantes, my elderly corgi, dozed at my feet as I reviewed the quarterly earnings from my investment portfolio. When my phone rang and Alaric's name flashed on the screen, I felt that familiar warmth that mothers never quite outgrow. "The proposal's finished," he announced without preamble. "Lumina's going to revolutionize personalized medicine, Mom. The proprietary algorithm we've developed can predict drug efficacy based on genetic markers with 97% accuracy. This isn't just another startup. This is the future of healthcare." His enthusiasm was infectious. For the past year, he'd been developing Lumina Biotechnologies with his former college roommate, Thorne. Every conversation we'd had since Christmas had revolved around their breakthrough technology. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, genuinely proud. "When are you meeting with investors?" "That's why I'm calling." His voice took on that subtle shift I'd learned to recognize, the tone he used when he wanted something. "Venture capital is too slow, and they'll want too much equity. This technology is too valuable to give away chunks to people who don't understand it. I knew what was coming next. I need $7 million for launch capital. Equipment, lab space, clinical trials, regulatory approval, we've mapped it all out. With your backing, we could be operational by fall and profitable within 18 months. The amount didn't shock me. After selling Meridian, I had more wealth than I could spend in my lifetime. What surprised me was my hesitation, a new sensation, when it came to supporting Alaric's ventures. That's a significant investment, I said carefully. I'd like to review the business plan and financials before committing. Mom, this opportunity won't wait. We have a narrow window before competitors catch up. I need an answer today. Alaric, you know I believe in you, but proper due diligence. Due diligence? He laughed, but there was an edge to it. Mom, you founded a pharmaceutical company. You know how this industry works. Speed to market is everything. Which is exactly why careful planning is essential, I countered. The conversation continued in this vein for another 20 minutes. Him pressing, me requesting more information. Finally, he sighed dramatically. Fine, I'll send over the prospectus, but I need your decision by tomorrow. Thorne has another investor interested, but I told him I wanted to keep this in the family. After we hung up, I sat in contemplative silence, one hand absently stroking Cervantes's soft fur. Something felt different this time. Perhaps it was the pressure for an immediate decision, or maybe it was the subtle dismissal of my business expertise, as if I hadn't navigated the same regulatory landscape for 30 years. The prospectus arrived an hour later. As I scrolled through the document, my professional instincts triggered warning signals. The market analysis was suspiciously optimistic. The patent application status was vague. The burn rate calculations ignored several key expenses. But most concerning was the ownership structure. Alaric and Thorne would control 70% of the company, while I'd receive a 30% non-voting stake for my investment. I picked up my phone and began typing a message requesting clarification on these issues when a notification appeared. Alaric had accidentally included me on an email chain with Thorne. Mom's asking questions about the prospectus. Don't worry, I'll handle her. She doesn't understand modern biotech anyway. She's stuck in old-school pharmaceutical thinking. Once we get the money, we can adjust the development timeline. She won't know the difference. My finger froze above the screen. I scrolled down to read Thorne's response. Is she getting suspicious? We need that cash before the Westridge deal closes next month. Can't you just tell her it's for equipment or something? Play the dutiful son card. Seems to work every time. The dutiful son card. The phrase pierced me like a physical blow. Was that how Alaric viewed our relationship? A card to be played when he needed money? I scrolled further, my chest tightening with each exchange. Relax, Alaric had written back. Mom's so desperate to feel included in my life she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. The old lady's lonelier than she admits. Besides, her cognitive abilities aren't what they used to be. She asked me the same question twice during our call today. I hadn't asked anything twice. I'd been deliberate in my questioning, circling back to get more specific answers about points he'd evaded. Perfect, Thorne replied. The senile old lady routine works in our favor. Once we secure this round of funding, we can focus on the real prize. Selling the concept to Westridge Pharmaceuticals. They won't care if the algorithm actually works as promised. By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be on my yacht in the Mediterranean. I sat perfectly still as the truth crystallized with painful clarity. There was no revolutionary algorithm, no 97% accuracy rate, no proprietary technology. Just an elaborate mock-up designed to secure funding from investors, starting with the easiest mark they knew. Me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it defied my comprehension. This wasn't my ambitious, driven son making a questionable business decision. This was a con man who happened to share my DNA. As the shock subsided, another emotion surfaced, one I hadn't anticipated: relief. A strange, liberating relief that the illusion had finally shattered. No more excuses. No more rationalizations. No more hoping that one day my sacrifices would earn his genuine respect. I closed the email and set my phone down. Then I did something I'd never done before. I poured myself a glass of the 30-year-old Scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion and walked out to my garden terrace. The western sky blazed orange and pink as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. I sipped the amber liquid slowly, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. How many sunsets had I missed over the years, too busy building a company, raising a child, trying to prove my worth to a world that never asked me to? That night, I didn't call Alaric to confront him. I didn't compose an angry email or text message. Instead, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following morning, I made 2 appointments, one with my financial advisor and one with my therapist. Then, I took Cervantes for a long walk through Rose Hill Park, paying attention to details I'd always been too busy to notice. The pattern of lichen on stone walls, the complex songs of nesting birds, the way sunlight filtered through newly unfurled leaves. When I returned home, Alaric had left 3 voicemails and 5 text messages, each increasingly urgent. "Mom, did you review the prospectus? We need to move on this today." "Mom, Thorne's other investor is pressing for an answer. Call me ASAP." "Is everything okay? You always answer by now. Call me back." "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. This opportunity won't wait." "Fine. If you don't want to be part of my success, just say so. I thought you believed in me." I typed a brief response. "Coming down with something. We'll call tomorrow." His reply was immediate. "That's fine, but I need a yes on the funding today. I can handle the paperwork later. Just need your verbal approval to secure the lab space." Of course he did. Instead of responding, I called my old friend and attorney, Imogen Vega. "Ilara," her rich voice answered on the second ring. "To what do I owe this pleasure? Don't tell me you're starting another company. Retirement suits you too well." "Not a company," I replied. "I need advice about Alaric." 2 hours later, I had a comprehensive picture of my son's financial situation, and it was far worse than I'd imagined. The Azure Bay condo I'd gifted them was mortgaged to the hilt. 3 credit cards were maxed out. The luxury cars were leased under my corporate entity. And most alarmingly, Alaric had taken out a $450,000 personal loan from Coastal Heritage Bank 3 months ago, using my name as a co-signer. I had never signed those papers. "That's forgery," Imogen stated flatly. "We need to report this to the authorities immediately." "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Not yet. I need time to think." "Ilara?" Imogen's tone softened. "I've known you for 30 years. You've always been the most rational person in any room. Don't let maternal instinct cloud your judgment now. This is criminal behavior." "I'm not protecting him," I assured her. "I just need to handle this my way." That evening, as I sat in my study contemplating my next move, the doorbell rang. Cervantes barked once from his bed, then settled back down. He recognized the visitor. Alaric stood on my doorstep, his handsome face arranged in an expression of boyish concern. He'd inherited my green eyes and his father's strong jawline, a combination that had always opened doors for him. "Mom, you weren't answering my calls. I was worried sick." He stepped forward to embrace me, the scent of expensive cologne enveloping us both. I returned the hug with mechanical politeness, then stepped back. "I'm fine, just tired. Come in." He followed me to the kitchen, where I busied myself making tea. His eyes scanned my movements with unusual intensity. "You don't seem sick," he observed cautiously. "Just a headache." I set the kettle on the stove. "How's Nissa?" "She's great. Working on a new client's lake house." He leaned against the counter, trying to look casual. "Did you get a chance to look over the materials I sent?" "I did." "And?" His eagerness was palpable. I turned to face him fully. "I have some concerns about the financial projections." His expression flickered briefly before settling into patient condescension. "Mom, tech valuations work differently from traditional pharma. The metrics you're used to don't apply here. I understand disruptive technologies, Alaric. I've funded enough of them, but even disruptors need solid science behind them." A shadow crossed his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need proof that this algorithm works as claimed. I'd like to meet with your development team and see a demonstration." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, the code is highly proprietary. We can't risk—" "I built and sold a pharmaceutical company, Alaric. I know how to sign an NDA." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's not about trust. It's about protecting our intellectual property at this delicate stage." "I see." I poured hot water into 2 mugs. "Well, without seeing evidence of a functional product, I'm afraid I can't provide the funding." Alaric's charm disappeared like a switch had been flipped. "Are you serious? After everything I've put into this? After telling Thorne I could deliver the investment?" I stirred honey into my tea with deliberate slowness. "I'm just being diligent. Any investor would ask the same questions. You're not just any investor. You're my mother." His voice rose, sharply. "This is my chance to finally build something significant, to step out from your shadow. And you're sabotaging me because your feelings are hurt that I didn't consult you earlier?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think this is? About my ego? What else could it be? I've presented you with the opportunity of a lifetime, technology that could transform healthcare as we know it, and you're nitpicking the prospectus like some entry-level analyst." I took a calm sip of tea. "The bank called about the loan, Alaric." His face went blank. "What loan?" "The $450,000 from Coastal Heritage. They're concerned about the missed payments." A series of calculations visibly ran behind his eyes. That must be some mistake. I don't have a loan with them." "Not in your name, no. In mine, as co-signer." He swallowed hard. "I might have used your name as a reference." "Stop." I set my mug down gently. "We both know what you did. The question is why." For a moment, I thought he might continue denying it. Instead, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before: contempt. "Because I needed it, and you would have said no. You've been tightening the purse strings ever since you sold Meridian, acting like I'm some irresponsible child who can't be trusted. Forging my signature on loan documents rather proves that point, doesn't it?" He slammed, his hand on the counter, making Cervantes jump up with a startled yelp. "You have hundreds of millions sitting in accounts doing nothing. What does it matter if I needed some capital? Everything I've built has been to make you proud, to continue your legacy." "My legacy?" I felt an unexpected calm settling over me. My legacy was built on real science, real products that helped real people, not smoke and mirrors designed to separate investors from their money. His eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "The email chain with Thorne. You accidentally included me." The color drained from his face. For several seconds, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Then, remarkably, he laughed. A hollow, unpleasant sound. "Well, this is awkward." I said nothing, just watched as he paced the kitchen, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, Mom, business communication sometimes sounds harsh out of context. Thorne has a crude sense of humor. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. He stopped pacing and faced me, something calculating entering his expression. Fine. Cards on the table. Yes, we exaggerated some of the technical specifications. That's how fundraising works these days. But the concept is sound, and with proper funding, we can make it real. And the Westridge deal? Selling them technology you know doesn't work? He shrugged, a gesture so callous it made my heart constrict. Companies acquire intellectual property and concepts all the time. Once they own it, what they do with it is their business. I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Alaric's face, and tried to pinpoint exactly when I'd lost him. Had he always been this person, or had I created him through years of indulgence? Had my attempts to give him everything his father had denied him actually robbed him of something essential? I'll make you a deal, I said finally. I'll transfer $7 million to Lumina tomorrow, as requested. His expression brightened instantly. I knew you'd understand once I explained. On one condition, I continued. You pay back the forged loan immediately, with a written confession of what you did, which I'll keep in my safe. If you ever attempt anything like this again, I'll take it straight to the authorities. He considered this for barely a second, before nodding eagerly. Of course, absolutely. I was going to pay that back anyway as soon as Lumina took off. I'm sure you were. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I'll make the transfer tomorrow morning. Send me the account. Details. After he left, I sat in my darkened kitchen for a long time, Cervantes resting his head sympathetically on my knee. The house felt oppressively quiet, the weight of decades of memories pressing in from all sides. In this very kitchen, I'd taught Alaric to make pancakes when he was barely tall enough to reach the counter. On holidays, we'd baked cookies using his grandmother's recipes. When he'd been accepted to Stanford, we'd danced around the island in celebration. Where had that boy gone? Had he ever really existed? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. With a few taps, I scheduled the transfer for 9 a.m. the following morning, plenty of time for a restless night of second-guessing myself. But when morning came, I didn't second-guess. I didn't waver. I didn't transfer the money. Instead, I did something much more significant. The late morning sun streamed through my office window as I closed my laptop with a definitive click. Instead of transferring the $7 million, I had just sent an email to the fraud department at Coastal Heritage Bank. Attached was a detailed account of the forged loan documents, along with a request for an investigation. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up my phone and called Imogen. It's done, I said simply when she answered. The transfer? She asked cautiously. No. The report to the bank. I've documented the forgery. A long pause followed. Ilara, are you sure about this? Absolutely. I stood up and walked to the window, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the dogwood branches. It's time Alaric understood that actions have consequences. He could face criminal charges. I know. And you're prepared for that? The question hung in the air like a test. Was I truly prepared to see my only child potentially imprisoned for fraud? The son whose first steps I'd witnessed, whose nightmares I'd soothed, whose graduation speech had brought me to tears. I have to be, I finally answered. This isn't just about the money, Imogen. It's about who he's becoming. After we hung up, I took Cervantes for a walk to the small lake at the edge of my property. The water was mirror smooth, reflecting the cloudless sky and surrounding pines with perfect clarity. I found a bench and sat, watching a family of ducks navigate the reeds along the shoreline. My phone buzzed. Alaric. Mom, what's going on? The bank just called me about some fraud investigation. I took a deep breath. Yes, I reported the loan. You what? His voice rose to a shout. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what this could do to me? I'm perfectly aware. I replied, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. Just as you were aware of what you were doing when you forged my signature. It's just money. Money you'll never miss. Money that was going to help launch a company. That would have made us both richer. This isn't about money, Alaric. It's about trust. It's about respect. He snorted derisively. Oh, please, don't pretend you're taking some moral high ground here. You're just bitter because you found out I think you're losing it. Well, guess what? This pretty much proves it. What kind of mother reports her own son to the authorities? The kind who's finally stopped enabling destruction, I thought. But I didn't say that. I've also canceled the transfer to Lumina, I said instead. And I've forwarded your email exchange with Thorne to the SEC's fraud division. Dead silence followed. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the righteous anger, replaced by something cold and calculating. You've made a serious mistake, he said quietly. I'm not going down alone for this. When they investigate, they'll find your fingerprints all over my previous ventures. The tax implications alone. Are you threatening me? I interrupted, incredulous. I'm stating facts. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. So I suggest you call off the dogs before we both get hurt. I ended the call without another word, my hand trembling slightly as I set the phone down beside me. Cervantes whimpered and nudged my leg, sensing my distress. I scratched behind his ears absently, my mind racing. Was Alaric bluffing? I'd always been scrupulous in my business dealings, but I had certainly been generous with investments in his various enterprises over the years. Had I been careless? Had I signed documents without proper review, trusting that my son wouldn't implicate me in anything questionable? The thought sent a chill through me despite the warm spring air. I stood up and walked briskly back to the house, purpose replacing uncertainty with each step. If Alaric wanted a fight, he would find me prepared. Back in my study, I spent the next 3 hours pulling records of every transaction between us. For the past decade. Investment agreements, gifts, loans, some forgiven, some repaid. I created a detailed timeline and consulted with both Imogen and my accountant, Xavier. You're clean, Xavier assured me after reviewing everything. Every transaction was properly documented and reported. If anything, you've been excessively transparent with the IRS about your financial support of his businesses. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. Cervantes barked excitedly, his tail wagging. He recognized the visitor. My stomach tightened. Only 2 people elicited that response from him, Alaric and Nisa. I opened the door to find my daughter-in-law standing on the porch, immaculately dressed in a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her expression was a perfect mask of concern. Alara, she said softly, may I come in? I think we need to talk. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. Nisa had always been difficult for me to read. Unlike Alaric, whose manipulations had a certain transparent quality once you knew to look for them, Nisa operated on a more subtle frequency. She was elegant, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless when it came to achieving her goals, qualities I might have admired in different circumstances. Would you like some tea? I offered, more from habit than hospitality. No, thank you. She followed me to the living room and perched on the edge of my sofa, her posture perfectly erect. I think you know why I'm here. Alaric sent you to change my mind. She tilted her head slightly, considering. Not exactly. He doesn't know. I'm here. That surprised me. In 7 years of marriage, I'd never known Nisa to act independently of Alaric's interests. I'm listening, I said, settling into the armchair across from her. You've put us in an impossible position, Alara. The bank investigation, the SEC, tip. Do you realize what this will do to our reputation? Our future? I didn't put you in this position. Alaric's actions did. She waved this away impatiently. Let's not be childish about assigning blame. What's done is done. The question is how to move forward with minimal damage to all parties. And how do you suggest we do that? Nisa reached into her handbag and extracted a slim folder, which she placed on the coffee table between us. A solution that serves everyone's interests. She slid the folder toward me. Take a look. Inside was a document titled Conservatorship Petition. My name was listed as the subject, Alaric's as the petitioner. I looked up at Nissa, momentarily speechless. It's not filed yet, she explained smoothly. But it could be. Alaric has collected quite a file on your cognitive decline, missed appointments, confusion during conversations, misplaced items. The gardener and housekeeper will testify they've observed concerning behaviors. Your own physician has noted memory concerns at your last physical. Dr. Kessler had done no such thing. I'd been in perfect health at my last checkup. That would be perjury, I said, keeping my voice steady. Would it? Nisa raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Ilara, be reasonable. You're 67. Memory lapses are expected at your age. Who would question it? Especially when the alternative explanation is that a devoted son is committing fraud against his own mother. I sat very still, absorbing the full implications of what she was proposing. They weren't just threatening me with financial entanglement. They were threatening to take away my autonomy completely. So this is your solution? I finally asked. I drop the fraud reports, transfer the money to Lumina, and in exchange, you don't try to have me declared incompetent? I prefer to see it as a family working through a misunderstanding. Alaric made a mistake with the loan. He admits that. But reporting him to authorities is an overreaction that helps no one. We're offering a path back to normalcy. Normalcy, I repeated, where I finance your lifestyle without question while you plot behind my back. Nissa sighed as if disappointed by my stubbornness. We all benefited from the arrangement, Alara. You got to feel needed and involved in your son's life. We received the financial support to maintain appearances in circles that have helped your social standing as well. It was symbiotic. I almost laughed at the cold assessment of our relationship. In Nissa's world, everything was transactional, even family bonds. And if I refuse this generous offer? Then we proceed with the conservatorship petition. Your recent erratic behavior, making false accusations, threatening your own son with criminal charges, will support our case that you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. I stood up, my decision made. I think you should leave. Now. Nisa remained seated, her gaze level. You haven't given me your answer. I believe I have. She finally rose, smoothing her already perfect slacks. You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, the petition will be filed. After showing her out, I leaned against the closed door, my heart pounding. The audacity of their scheme was breathtaking. Not content with merely stealing from me, they now planned to strip me of my legal rights, my dignity, my independence. I returned to the living room and picked up the conservatorship petition, reading it more carefully this time. The document was professionally prepared, with supporting exhibits referenced throughout. This wasn't a hastily assembled threat. They had been planning this for some time. I called Imogen again, this time activating the video feature so I could show her the petition. This changes everything, she said grimly after examining it. They're playing hardball. Even if the petition ultimately fails, the process itself would be invasive and humiliating for you. What are my options? Legally, we fight it, of course. But given Alaric's apparent willingness to forge documents and commit perjury, we need to approach this differently. We need evidence of your competence that's irrefutable, and evidence of their conspiracy that's equally clear. I nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in my mind. I think I know how to get both. The next morning, I called Alaric and asked him to meet me for lunch. I suggested Bellini's, an upscale restaurant downtown where he'd proposed to Nisa 7 years earlier. The sentimental location was calculated. I wanted him to believe I was softening. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, nursing a scotch despite the early hour. He stood as I approached, his expression wary. "Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I allowed it, noting the familiar scent of his cologne, a gift I'd bought him for his 30th birthday. "I'm glad you called." "Thank you for meeting me," I replied, taking my seat. "I think it's time we discussed how to resolve this situation." Relief flickered across his face. "Nisa mentioned you two had talked. I hope you understand we're just trying to protect everyone's interests here." "Including mine?" I raised an eyebrow. "Of course." He had the decency to look slightly abashed. "The conservatorship was just a contingency plan. Obviously, we'd prefer not to go that route." "Obviously," I echoed, opening my menu. "I suggest the risotto." "It's excellent here," we ordered, making painfully polite small talk until our meals arrived. Only after the waiter had retreated did I broach the real subject of our meeting. "I've been thinking about your situation with Coastal Heritage," I began carefully, "and about Lumina." Alaric set down his fork, suddenly attentive. "And? I may have overreacted by reporting the forgery. After all, you are my son. Family should resolve issues privately when possible." "Exactly," he agreed, eagerly. "I made a mistake, Mom. I admit that, but I never intended to harm you." I took a sip of water, watching him over the rim of my glass. "So you say, but trust, once broken, is difficult to repair." "I know." He reached across the table to take my hand. "Let me make it right. Tell me what you need from me." "First, I need to understand exactly what happened with the loan. Why didn't you just ask me directly?" He sighed, withdrawing his hand. "Because you've been increasingly cautious with your investments lately. Ever since selling Meridian, you've been harder to convince. I was afraid you'd say no, and I needed the capital urgently." "For what purpose?" "The loan predates Lumina's formation." He shifted uncomfortably. "There were gambling debts from a private poker game, high stakes. I was sure I could win it back, but—" "You lost more," I finished for him. It wasn't the first time Alaric had found himself in this situation. During his college years, I'd bailed him out of similar trouble twice. "And the money is gone now?" "Not all of it. Some went to the initial Lumina setup, lab deposits, equipment, that sort of thing." "And the rest?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Various obligations. Translation, luxury purchases, travel, perhaps more gambling to try to recoup losses." The familiar pattern made my heart ache with a strange mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer," I said, keeping my voice businesslike. "I'll withdraw the fraud report with the bank. I'll cover the outstanding loan payments to bring the account current." His face brightened instantly. "Thank you. I promise." I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. In exchange, you will sign a legally binding agreement acknowledging the debt to me personally with a structured repayment plan. You will also provide full financial transparency going forward, including monthly statements for all accounts, personal and business." The brightness dimmed somewhat. "That seems excessive." "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." He considered this, clearly calculating whether fighting the fraud allegations would be more painful than accepting my oversight. "And what about Lumina? The funding?" "I'm prepared to invest $500,000. Not the full amount you requested. The money will be dispersed in stages based on verified milestones, with full documentation of how it's being spent." $500,000? He couldn't hide his disappointment. "Mom, that's barely enough to prove the concept you claim to have developed," I interrupted. If the technology is as revolutionary as you say, that should be more than sufficient to create a working prototype and attract additional investors. He fell silent, his jaw working as he processed this drastically reduced offer. Finally, he nodded. All right, I accept. Good. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Have Thorne prepare a proper business plan with realistic projections and verifiable milestones. I'll have my team review it before any money changes hands. Your team? He repeated. Yes. I've engaged a business consultant to help evaluate the investment. I believe you know him, Raphael Winters. Alaric's face paled slightly. Raphael had been my chief financial officer at Meridian for 15 years. He was brilliant, meticulous, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to financial integrity. He was also one of the few executives who had never been charmed by Alaric. Is that really necessary? He asked, his voice strained. Absolutely. I'm taking your venture seriously, Alaric. That means applying proper due diligence. He nodded stiffly, then forced a smile. Of course. We have nothing to hide. Lunch. Concluded with forced pleasantries. As he walked me to my car, Alaric attempted one more appeal. About the conservatorship paperwork. Nisa should never have shown you that. It was just a contingency we discussed, nothing more. I hope you know I would never actually file it. I looked at him directly, searching his face for any trace of the little boy who had once held my hand crossing streets, who had made me handmade Mother's Day cards, who had promised to buy me a castle when he became rich. Wouldn't you? I asked softly. He had the grace to look away. As I drove home, I called Imogen from the car's hands-free system. He took the bait, I told her. Schedule the meeting with Raphael for Thursday, and make sure the recording devices were properly activated during lunch. Already processing the audio, she confirmed. Was he explicit enough about the forgery? Crystal clear. He admitted everything, including his gambling debts and the conservatorship threat. Perfect. What about Thorne? Will he cooperate with this charade? Alaric will make him. He's too desperate for the funding to risk refusing my terms. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Alaric. Thorne's on board. We'll have the revised business plan to you by end of week. I forwarded it to Imogen with a simple message. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 began the following day. I visited my physician, Dr. Abernathy, for a complete cognitive assessment. After 3 hours of testing, she provided a detailed report confirming what I already knew. I was functioning at exceptionally high cognitive levels for my age, with no signs of impairment. You could teach my medical students a thing or two about mental acuity, she remarked as she handed me the report. May I ask why you requested these tests? Are you experiencing concerning symptoms? Not symptoms, I replied carefully. Concerns of a different nature. She nodded, understanding immediately. Family matters? Something like that. This report should address any questions about your capacity, she assured me. I've been your physician for 20 years, Alara. I'd stake my professional reputation on your competence. Thank you, Regina. That means more than you know. Next, I visited Coastal Heritage Bank, meeting directly with the fraud investigator handling my case. I explained that while the signature on the loan documents was indeed forged, I had decided not to pursue criminal charges against my son. However, I added, I want the record to show that I reported the forgery promptly upon discovering it. And I want to be removed as cosigner immediately. We can certainly document your report, the investigator confirmed. As for removing you as cosigner, that's complicated. Mr. Blackwood wouldn't qualify for the loan without your backing, which he obtained fraudulently, I pointed out. True, we could call the loan due immediately on those grounds. I considered this option. It would certainly create immediate pressure on Alaric, but it might also drive him to more desperate measures. For my plan to work, I needed to maintain the illusion that I was still manipulable. Let's hold off on that for now, I decided. But I want it clearly documented that I've contested the signature and wish to be removed as soon as the bank's policies allow. The third component of Phase 2 required more subtlety. Through Imogen, I arranged a meeting with Thorne Prescott, ostensibly to discuss the revised business plan for Lumina. We met at a quiet cafe near his apartment, neutral territory where Alaric was unlikely to appear unexpectedly. Thorne was younger than I expected, perhaps early 30s, with the polished appearance of someone who'd grown up with privilege. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. Mrs. Blackwood, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Alaric speaks of you often. I'm sure he does, I replied dryly. Shall we get straight to business? I understand you're reworking the Lumina proposal based on my revised investment parameters. Yes, we're adjusting our timeline and deliverables to accommodate the initial funding level. His tone carried just a hint of condescension, the tech entrepreneur humoring the old-school investor who didn't quite grasp the vision. I've reviewed your background, Mr. Prescott. Harvard Business School, followed by 2 startups, both acquired, though at relatively modest valuations. No scientific training, despite Lumina being positioned as a biotech venture. He blinked, clearly surprised by my directness. I handle the business operations. Our technical team doesn't exist, I finished for him. At least not beyond the contract developers you've engaged for rudimentary coding. His surprise turned to wariness. I'm not sure what Alaric has told you about our operation. Alaric has told me a great many things. I'm more interested in what you can tell me. Thorne leaned back, his expression shifting to calculation. What exactly are you looking for, Mrs. Blackwood? The truth, which I already have, courtesy of your email exchanges with my son. Color drained from his face. Those messages were explicit about your intentions to defraud investors, beginning with me. I opened my tablet and turned it toward him, displaying the damning email thread. What I'm curious about is whether you're willing to risk federal charges for your part in this scheme. Are you threatening me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm offering you an opportunity. Testify about Alaric's plan, including the forged loan documents and the conservatorship threat, and I'll exclude you from any legal action I pursue. You'd do that to your own son? Genuine shock registered on his face. My son is making choices that will destroy his life if left unchecked. Sometimes love means allowing natural consequences to take their course. Thorne was silent for a long moment, visibly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. What do you need from me? A sworn affidavit detailing everything, the fake technology claims, the plan to sell non-existent intellectual property to Westridge, Alaric's admission of forgery. Everything. He'll know it was me. He'll come after me. I shook my head. Not if we structure this correctly. The affidavit stays sealed unless he forces my hand. Think of it as insurance. And in exchange, you walk away clean. And I don't contact the 2 investors from your previous startup who might be interested to learn how you misrepresented the user metrics before acquisition. His eyes widened slightly. You've been thorough. I built a pharmaceutical company from nothing, Mr. Prescott. Due diligence is second nature to me. By week's end, I had assembled everything I needed. Medical certification of my cognitive competence, bank documentation of the forgery report, Thorne's notarized affidavit, and the restaurant recording of Alaric admitting to both the forgery and the conservatorship threat. Phase 3 was ready to begin. Saturday morning dawned with unusual clarity, the kind that follows a night of decisive action. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping Earl Grey tea and reviewing the document Imogen had prepared, a comprehensive cease and desist letter addressing both the fraud and the conservatorship threat. Its language was precise, unambiguous, and backed by the evidence I'd gathered over the past week. Cervantes curled at my feet, occasionally lifting his head when I shifted position. His steadfast presence had become even more precious to me. Lately, a reminder that unconditional love did exist in this world, even if not always where one expected to find it. My phone chimed with a text from Alaric. Business plan ready for review. Dinner at our place tonight to discuss? Nissa's making that salmon you like. The casual tone was jarring after everything that had transpired. It was as if he genuinely believed our lunch meeting had reset everything, that his admission of forgery, the conservatorship threat, and years of financial manipulation could be smoothed over with a family dinner and his wife's cooking. Can't tonight, I typed back. Meeting tomorrow at my office, 10 a.m., bring Thorn. 3 dots appeared as he started typing a response, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, your office? You retired. Meridian still maintains an office. For me. Conference Room B. This was true. Part of my sale agreement had included lifetime access to a modest suite at the company headquarters. I rarely used it, preferring to work from home when necessary. But tomorrow's meeting required neutral territory with proper security. Fine. See you then. I set my phone down and gazed out the window at my garden. The irises were blooming, their deep purple petals catching the morning light. I'd planted them 3 years ago after attending a botanical workshop, the first hobby I'd pursued purely for pleasure after decades of work-centered existence. Since then, gardening had become my sanctuary, a place where growth and decay followed natural rhythms, where effort and care yielded visible results. How different from the artificial, manipulated relationship I'd cultivated with my son. The doorbell rang, startling me from my contemplation. I wasn't expecting visitors. Through the security monitor, I saw a slender young woman with cropped, black hair standing on my porch, nervously shifting her weight from foot to foot. I didn't recognize her. My finger hovered over the intercom button, hesitating. After recent events, I'd grown more cautious about unexpected visitors. But something, in her demeanor, anxious yet determined, prompted me to press the button. May I help you? The woman looked up, startled by the sound of my voice. Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Zara Michaels. I worked for your son at Lumina. I need to speak with you. It's important. Intrigued, I opened the door. Zara appeared to be in her late 20s, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt. Her expression was a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Please, come in, I offered, leading her to the living room. Can I get you anything to drink? No, thank you. She perched on the edge of the sofa, clutching a messenger bag to her chest. I apologize for coming unannounced. I couldn't risk calling. I wasn't sure if Mr. Blackwood monitored your communications. That was a concerning assumption. He doesn't, I assured her, though privately I wondered if I'd been naive about that as well. What's this about, Ms. Michaels? I was Lumina's lead data scientist, she began, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. Hired 4 months ago to develop the predictive algorithm Mr. Blackwood described in the company prospectus. The algorithm that supposedly predicts drug efficacy based on genetic markers. She nodded. That's the one, except it doesn't work. Not even close. The foundational science is sound, but the implementation is years away from commercial viability. I tried explaining this to Mr. Blackwood, but he insisted we present the algorithm as functional in investor materials. And when was this? 3 weeks ago. When I refused, he fired me. She unzipped her bag and withdrew a tablet. But not before I documented everything. The actual state of the algorithm, the fabricated test results, the investor presentations with falsified data. She handed me the tablet, its screen displaying a folder labeled Lumina Evidence. Why are you bringing this to me? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Because you're his primary investor, according to public records. She hesitated. And because I heard Lumina is about to close a significant round of funding, People could lose millions on technology that doesn't exist. I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of ulterior motives. Her expression remained earnest, her gaze direct. "There's something else you should know," she continued. "Mr. Blackwood hasn't been paying the development team for the past month. He claims the funds are tied up in escrow, but several of us checked with the bank. There is no escrow account." This aligned with what I'd already discovered about Alaric's financial shell game. The loan money had clearly been diverted to personal expenses rather than legitimate business costs. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I said sincerely. "May I keep this tablet temporarily? I promise to return it once I've reviewed the materials." "Of course." She reached into her bag again and handed me a business card. My contact information. "Please let me know if you need anything clarified." After Zara left, I spent several hours reviewing her documentation. It was meticulous, clearly the work of a thorough and principled professional. The contrast between her ethics and my son's couldn't have been more stark. I called Imogen and explained the unexpected development. "This is a gift," she replied. "Zara's testimony and documentation will be invaluable if Alaric decides to fight your cease and desist. Should I add her materials to tomorrow's meeting? Agenda? Absolutely. The more comprehensive our case, the less room he has to maneuver." I spent the rest of the day preparing, organizing my evidence and rehearsing what I would say. Not out of nervousness, but from a desire for precision. This confrontation needed to be definitive. There could be no loose ends, no ambiguity that Alaric might exploit. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The clarity of purpose had a remarkably calming effect. Sunday morning, I arrived at Meridian's headquarters an hour before the scheduled meeting. The security guard greeted me warmly. Many of the long-term staff still remembered me from my days as CEO. I set up the conference room carefully, placing folders at each seat containing copies of the evidence I'd gathered. At precisely 10 a.m., my former assistant, Vivian, who still worked for Meridian, escorted Alaric and Thorne into the room. Both men were dressed in business casual attire, projecting confidence. Thorne carried a sleek presentation portfolio, presumably containing the revised business plan. Nisa was conspicuously absent. "Mom," Alaric greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "You're looking well." "Thank you." I gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit down." They complied, Alaric taking the seat directly across from me while Thorne sat to his right. Neither immediately noticed the folders placed before them. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to clarify the purpose of this meeting. We're not here to discuss a potential investment in Lumina Biotechnologies." Alaric frowned. "But you said—" "I'm aware of what I said. That was necessary to ensure your attendance today." I opened my own folder and removed a document. "This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. It addresses several issues: the fraudulent loan from Coastal Heritage Bank, the false conservatorship petition, and the misrepresentation of Lumina's technological capabilities to potential investors." The color drained from Alaric's face. Thorne remained expressionless, though his gaze flicked briefly to the door as if calculating an escape route. "I suggest you both review the contents," I continued, "particularly the supporting evidence." Alaric opened his folder slowly, his confidence visibly crumbling as he scanned the first page. Thorne didn't touch his. "What is this?" Alaric finally asked, his voice strained. "Some kind of shakedown?" "A shakedown implies I want something from you. I don't. I want something for you. Accountability." He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from shock to anger. "You recorded our lunch conversation? That's illegal. Not in this state. Single-party consent is all that's required, and I consented." I turned to Thorne. "Mr. Prescott, aren't you going to review your copy?" Thorne cleared his throat. "I'm familiar with the content." Understanding dawned on Alaric's face. "You son of a bitch. You talked to her." He turned to me, eyes blazing. And you wonder why I kept things from you? Look how quickly you turned. My own partner against me. He made a business decision, I replied evenly. Just as you did when you chose to forge my signature and file a fraudulent conservatorship petition. I never filed it. The intent was clear, as was your intent to defraud investors with non-existent technology. I removed Zara's tablet from my briefcase and set it on the table. Your former data scientist was quite thorough in documenting the actual state of Lumina's algorithm. Alaric's face contorted with fury. Zara? That vindictive bitch. I fired her for incompetence. Her documentation suggests otherwise, as does her academic background and professional reputation. He slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. I'm your son. How can you do this to me? I'm not doing anything to you, Alaric. Your actions have created this situation. By trying to build something of my own? By trying to step out of the great Alara Blackwood's shadow for once in my life? By lying. By stealing. By manipulating. Those were your choices, not mine. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And now you're going to what? Turn me in? Have your own son arrested? How will that look to your precious social circle? My concern isn't appearances, Alaric. It's your character. You're on a destructive path that will eventually lead to consequences far worse than what I'm proposing today. Which is what exactly? Thorne interjected, speaking for the first time. What are your terms? I folded my hands on the table. Complete financial transparency, immediate dissolution of Lumina, and return of any investor funds. A written acknowledgement of the forgery to be held in escrow by my attorney. Regular sessions with a therapist specializing in financial behavior disorders. I turned to Alaric. And most importantly, an honest conversation about the pattern of deception that's defined our relationship for years. Alaric stared at me in disbelief. You want me to close my company and see a shrink? That's your solution? That's my offer. The alternative is that I forward all of this evidence to the appropriate authorities, the bank's fraud division, the SEC, the district attorney's office. The choice is yours. He stood abruptly, sending his chair skidding backward. You've lost your mind. I'm not agreeing to any of this. Then I suggest you retain a good criminal defense attorney. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. Alaric, maybe we should consider— Shut up! Alaric snapped. You've done enough damage. He turned back to me, his face flushed with anger. You think you've won, don't you? The great Alara Blackwood, always. 3 steps ahead. Well, enjoy your victory. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you're alone in that big, empty house of yours. I'm already warm, I replied quietly. I have the truth, and I have my integrity. He laughed bitterly. Integrity, right. The woman who built a fortune selling overpriced drugs to desperate people is lecturing me about integrity. Meridian's medications saved lives. They were priced fairly for the research investment they represented. And we maintained one of the most generous patient assistance programs in the industry. I kept my voice calm, refusing to be baited. But we're not here to debate my business ethics. We're addressing your actions. No, we're done here. He snatched up his jacket from the back of his chair. Come on, Thorne. We're leaving. Thorne hesitated, glancing between Alaric and me. I think I'll stay and discuss options with Mrs. Blackwood. Traitor, Alaric spat. You'll regret this. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him with such force that the glass wall of the conference room vibrated. Thorne exhaled slowly. That went about as expected. Yes. I gathered my papers calmly. It did. What happens now? Now we wait. Alaric has 48 hours to accept my terms before I proceed with formal complaints to the authorities. Thorne nodded, his expression pensive. For what it's worth, I didn't know about the conservatorship plan. That was all him and Nisa. But you knew about the forgery and the fraudulent business plan. He had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, I did. Why? You had a promising career before this. 2 successful exits, connections in the venture capital world. Why risk everything on such an obvious scam? Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Because your son is very convincing when he wants to be. He has a gift for making you believe you're special, that you're part of something extraordinary. He smiled ruefully. I imagine you know that better than anyone. I did know. Alaric's charisma had always been his greatest asset and his most dangerous weapon. How many times had I convinced myself that this time would be different, that he'd finally learned his lesson, that his latest venture was legitimate? What will you do now? I asked. Start over, somewhere else, with a legitimate business model. He stood and extended his hand. Thank you for the second chance. Not everyone would have offered that. I shook his hand briefly. Don't waste it. After Thorne left, I remained in the conference room, staring out at the city skyline. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd anticipated, yet I felt no satisfaction. Only a profound sadness for what might have been, for the relationship Alaric and I could have had if honesty and respect had been its foundation. My phone buzzed with a text from Nissa. We need to talk. Alone. Meet me at Rose Hill Park, the gazebo by the lake. 4 p.m. I considered ignoring it. Nissa was as manipulative as Alaric, perhaps more so in her subtle way. But curiosity won out. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? I arrived at the park precisely at 4. The spring afternoon was glorious. Flowering trees in full bloom, children playing on nearby lawns, elderly couples strolling hand in hand along winding paths. The white Victorian gazebo overlooking the lake was empty when I approached, but moments later, I spotted Nissa walking briskly toward it. She wore dark sunglasses despite the shade of her wide-brimmed hat, and her normally impeccable appearance seemed slightly disheveled. When she removed the glasses as she entered the gazebo, I was shocked to see her right eye swollen and discolored. What happened to you? I asked, genuine concern overriding our adversarial relationship. What do you think happened? Her voice was bitter yet controlled. Alaric came home from your meeting in a rage. When I suggested he should consider your offer, she gestured toward her face. This is what your ultimatum accomplished. I sat down heavily on the gazebo bench. Has he done this before? Not physically. Emotional cruelty is more his style. She remained standing, arms crossed defensively. But he's never been backed into a corner like this before. Nissa, if you're in danger— Save your concern, she interrupted sharply. I'm not here for your pity. I'm here to make a deal. Of course she was. What kind of deal? I have documents, financial records, emails, text messages that prove Alaric's involvement in multiple fraudulent schemes beyond what you already know. Things that could send him to prison for years, not months. I studied her face, trying to read beyond the practiced poise. Why would you tell me this? Why turn against him now? She touched her bruised eye gingerly. Self-preservation. I've spent 7 years building a life with Alaric, investing in his dreams, covering for his indiscretions. I've lied to investors, to friends, even to myself about who he really is. Her voice wavered slightly. This morning, I finally saw the truth. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. Not me, not you, not the child I'm carrying. The last revelation hit me like a physical blow. You're pregnant? She nodded, one hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. 12 weeks. I told him last night, thinking it might soften him, make him reconsider his position with you. Instead, he accused me of trying to trap him, of using the pregnancy as leverage. Her eyes hardened. So now I am using it as leverage, just not with him. What do you want from me? I asked, though I already suspected. Financial security, independence, A chance to raise my child away from Alaric's influence. She sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. In exchange, I'll give you everything you need to ensure he faces full consequences for his actions. You're asking me to pay you to testify against my own son. The irony wasn't lost on me. To help put the father of your child in prison. I'm offering you the justice you clearly want, she countered, and asking for the security my child deserves. I gazed out at the lake, watching a pair of swans glide across its mirrored surface. The situation had taken yet another unexpected turn, presenting me with a decision I'd never anticipated making. The child, I said finally. My grandchild. Are you certain? For the first time, vulnerability showed through Nissa's composed facade. Yes. Despite everything, I want this baby. Maybe because it's the one honest thing to come out of my marriage. I believed her. Whatever Nissa's faults, and they were numerous, this unexpected honesty rang true. I won't pay you for testimony, I said, my decision crystallizing. That would be legally and ethically wrong. But I will ensure that my grandchild has financial security and educational opportunities, regardless of what happens with Alaric. Her expression shifted from calculation to cautious relief. And me? That depends on your choices going forward. I'm willing to help you establish independence, a reasonable settlement that reflects your situation, not your leverage. But I won't fund the lifestyle you've become accustomed to with Alaric. She considered this, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. I can accept those terms, on one condition. Which is? You don't tell Alaric about the baby. Not yet. Not until I'm safely away from him. The request troubled me. Despite everything, shouldn't Alaric know he was going to be a father? Then again, given his current state and what he'd done to Nissa, perhaps distance was the safest choice for now. Agreed, I said. But eventually, he should know. Eventually, she echoed, though her tone suggested she had a different timeline in mind. As we left the gazebo and walked toward the parking area, Nissa asked the question I'd been expecting. Will you really do it? Turn him in? Your own son? I stopped and faced her directly. I'm still hoping he'll make the right choice. Accept. Responsibility. Get help. Find a legitimate path forward. And if he doesn't? The swans had taken flight from the lake, their powerful wings carrying them skyward in perfect unison. I watched them until they disappeared against the bright blue expanse. Then yes, I said quietly. I will. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected downpour, dark clouds releasing torrents of rain that drummed against my bedroom windows. I lay awake listening to the storm, Cervantes snoring softly beside me. The weather matched my mood, turbulent, unsettled, yet somehow cleansing. The 48-hour deadline I'd given Alaric would expire tomorrow morning, and still no word. From him beyond a flurry of missed calls immediately after our confrontation, followed by ominous silence. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, a text from Imogen. Urgent, call me. I dialed her immediately. Alara, sorry to wake you, she began without preamble. Alaric emptied his accounts last night. All of them. The bank just flagged it through. Are monitoring. I sat up, suddenly alert. How much? Everything he could access. About $320,000 across personal and business accounts. Private jet company charged his card for a flight to Grand Cayman late last night. My heart sank. He's running. Looks that way. He's trying to move assets offshore before we can freeze them. I'd considered this possibility, but had hoped Alaric would choose a different path. What about Nissa? Is she with him? No indication she was on the flight. Do you want me to alert authorities now, or wait until the deadline? I thought of Nissa's bruised face, of her pregnancy, of all the evidence meticulously gathered. Waiting would only give Alaric more time to hide assets and prepare defenses. Alert them now, I decided. And contact Nisa. Make sure she's safe. After hanging up, I dressed quickly and headed downstairs. The kitchen felt unnaturally quiet save for the rain pattering against the windows. I made coffee mechanically, my mind working through implications and next steps. When my doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m., I assumed it was Imogen with updates. Instead, I found myself face to face with two serious-looking individuals in dark suits standing beneath black umbrellas. "Mrs. Alara Blackwood?" the woman asked, showing me credentials. "I'm Special Agent Daniels with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. This is Agent Carver. We'd like to ask you some questions about your son, Alaric Blackwood." I invited them in, offering coffee, which they declined. We sat in my living room, the formal setting somehow appropriate for this formal disintegration of my family life. "We've been investigating Lumina Biotechnologies for several months," Agent Daniels explained, "as well as other entities controlled by your son." This was unexpected. "Several months? What prompted the investigation?" "A pattern of suspicious activity flagged by our financial monitoring systems. Mr. Blackwood has been soliciting investments for multiple business ventures simultaneously, using the same underlying intellectual property claims." "You're saying—" "He was selling the same technology to different investors, representing it as exclusive to each?" "Precisely." Agent Carver opened a laptop. "We've documented at least 4 separate entities, each with different names and corporate structures, but all claiming ownership of the same proprietary algorithm." My stomach tightened. The scope of Alaric's deception was broader than I'd imagined. "I only became aware of potential fraud recently," I explained. "I was preparing to file formal complaints today." "So we understand," Agent Daniels nodded. "Your attorney contacted our office this morning with substantial evidence. That, combined with our existing investigation, prompted our visit. Do you know where my son is currently?" The agents exchanged glances. "We have reason to believe he left the country last night," Agent Carver confirmed. "We're coordinating with international law enforcement. I provided them with everything. I had the recordings, financial documentation, Zara's evidence, and my own detailed account of events." As they were preparing to leave, Agent Daniels paused. "Mrs. Blackwood, I have to ask, did you have any prior knowledge of your son's activities before your recent discovery?" The question carried clear implications. Was I a potential co-conspirator? Had I enabled or participated in Alaric's schemes? "No," I answered honestly. "I invested in his legitimate ventures over the years. I had no knowledge or involvement in these fraudulent activities." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We'll need you to make a formal statement at our office. Your attorney can be present." After they left, I called Imogen and updated her on the FBI's involvement. "This changes things," she said gravely. "It's no longer just about the loan or Lumina. They're building a case for wire fraud, securities fraud, identity theft. Serious federal charges. Have you been able to reach Nisa?" "No answer at their residence or on her cell. I've sent someone to check their condo." The rain continued to fall, sheets of water blurring the view from my windows. I found myself moving restlessly through the house, touching objects laden with memories, photo albums, holiday decorations, the antique chess set Alaric and I had played with on quiet Sunday afternoons when he was a teenager. How had we arrived at this point? When had the bright, ambitious boy I'd raised transformed into someone capable of such calculated deception? Or had I simply been blind to who he truly was all along, seeing only what I wanted to see? The call from Imogen came an hour later. "We found Nisa. She's at Rosedale Medical Center. Admitted last night with multiple injuries." What happened? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. The neighbor called 911 after hearing shouting and what sounded like furniture breaking. When police arrived, they found Nisa unconscious in the living room. Alaric was already gone. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "How serious are her injuries?" Concussion, broken wrist, facial contusions. Doctor says the baby appears unharmed, but they're monitoring closely. I'm on my way there. Ilara, wait. The FBI is already at the hospital taking her statement. It might be better if... She's carrying my grandchild, Imogen. I need to be there. The hospital corridors were bright and antiseptic, a stark contrast to the gloomy weather outside. I found Nisa's room easily enough. It was the one with a police officer stationed outside the door. After identifying myself and explaining our relationship, I was allowed entry. Nisa lay propped against white pillows, her normally flawless face marred by deep bruising. A cast encased her left wrist. When she saw me, her expression remained carefully neutral. I told them everything, she said without preamble, her voice raspy. About the forgery, the conservatorship plan, Lumina, all of it. I signed a formal statement. I approached her bedside slowly. I'm not here about that. I came to make sure you and the baby are all right. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. The doctors say the fetus is stable, no signs of detachment or distress. Good, that's good. I hesitated, then asked the question foremost in my mind. What happened last night, Nisa? She looked away, focusing on the rain-streaked window. Alaric came home after making some calls. He said he had a solution to our problems, that we were leaving the country, starting fresh somewhere without extradition. When I told him I wouldn't go, that I'd spoken to you. Her voice trailed off. He lost control, I finished for her. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I never thought he would. Not like this. He's been verbally cruel before, manipulative, but never physical. Not until yesterday at the gazebo. Her hand moved protectively to her abdomen. When he started throwing things, I told him about the baby, thinking it would calm him down. It didn't. No. He accused me of planning it as some kind of insurance policy, said I was conspiring with you against him. A single tear traced down her bruised cheek. He said he'd make sure I never saw a penny of his money, that he'd be gone before anyone could stop him. I pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down, feeling suddenly tired beyond measure. He took a private jet to Grand Cayman last night. The FBI is tracking him. They won't find him, she said with quiet certainty. Alaric has been preparing for this possibility for months. Offshore accounts, alternative identities, contacts in countries without extradition treaties. He has a whole escape infrastructure in place. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet it did. Even knowing what I now knew about my son, part of me still wanted to believe there were limits to his deception, lines he wouldn't cross. Do you know where he might go? I asked. I have suspicions. There's a property in Singapore he thinks I don't know about. He has contacts in Dubai, possibly a yacht registered in Montenegro. She met my gaze directly. I'll tell the FBI everything, but you should know. The man you're chasing isn't the son you remember. That person doesn't exist anymore, if he ever did. Her words landed like physical blows, yet I couldn't deny their truth. We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the persistent drumming of rain. What will you do now? I finally asked. Cooperate with the investigation. Recover from... She gestured vaguely at her injuries. Focus on staying healthy for the baby. And after? She looked genuinely uncertain for the first time since I'd known her. The carefully constructed facade of the polished, confident woman had cracked, revealing someone more vulnerable than I'd imagined. I don't know. My design business is mostly connections through Alaric. My family and I aren't close. Most of my friends are really his friends. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I suppose I'll have to reinvent myself. You don't have to do it alone. The words emerged before I'd fully considered them, yet I found I meant them. She studied me skeptically. Why would you help me after everything? The conservatorship? Scheme, the manipulation, the lies. I was part of all of it. Not all of it, I corrected. And you came forward in the end. Besides, I nodded toward her midsection. That's my grandchild. Whatever else has happened, that connection matters to me. For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed her face. Not calculation or performance, but authentic vulnerability. I don't know if I can be a good mother, she whispered. I never had the best example. Neither did I admitted. I made plenty of mistakes with Alaric. Perhaps the biggest was believing that material support could substitute for emotional honesty. I reached out hesitantly and placed my hand over hers. Maybe we both have things to learn. She didn't pull away. The next several weeks unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings, financial forensics, and media scrutiny. The FBI investigation revealed the full extent of Alaric's schemes, not just Lumina, but at least 5 other fraudulent ventures targeting different investor groups with essentially the same non-existent technology. The total amount exceeded $7 million, gathered from nearly 30 victims, including several retirement funds and a medical research foundation. I spent hours with federal prosecutors, providing statements and documentation. Each new revelation felt like discovering another room in a house I thought I knew, only to find it filled with strangers. Alaric remained at large. The Cayman Islands had merely been a waypoint. From there, he disappeared into a network of private transportation and false identities that the FBI was still trying to untangle. His face appeared on international watch lists and financial crime bulletins. Occasionally, possible sightings were reported: Dubai, Bangkok, Caracas, but none confirmed. Through it all, I maintained regular contact with Nisa, whose pregnancy was progressing normally despite the trauma she'd experienced. She moved from the condo she'd shared with Alaric to a serviced apartment I'd arranged in a secure building. Our relationship remained cautious but evolving, bound by the unexpected connection of the child she carried. One rainy afternoon in late June, I invited her to Rose Hill for tea. She arrived wearing a simple maternity dress, her pregnancy now clearly visible at 20 weeks. The bruises had faded, but something in her eyes remained shadowed. I had an ultrasound yesterday, she said as I poured Earl Grey into delicate cups my mother had left me. It's a girl, a granddaughter. The notion felt both surreal and deeply meaningful. Have you thought about names? A few, nothing definite yet. She stirred honey into her tea. The doctor says everything looks perfect. Strong heartbeat, all measurements normal. That's wonderful news. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the rain creating a gentle backdrop. I've been thinking, Nisa said finally, about what happens after she's born, about what kind of life I want to give her. And I don't want her to grow up in the shadow of scandal. I don't want her identity shaped by what her father did, or by wealth that comes without purpose or effort. She set her cup down carefully. I've decided to go back to school, finish my degree in architectural design. This was unexpected. Nissa had always seemed content in her role as Alaric's stylish wife, focusing on social connections and image maintenance rather than professional ambitions. That sounds like a positive step. When would you start? January term, if I can get the applications completed in time. There's a strong program at Wellington College with evening and weekend options for parents. She hesitated. I know we discussed your helping with the baby's education fund, but this would be separate. My education, my responsibility. I considered her words. The Nissa I'd first met, calculated, materialistic, focused on appearances, would never have made such a statement. Perhaps the trauma of recent events had fundamentally changed her. Or perhaps, like so many things, I'd never truly seen her clearly. What if we approached it differently? I suggested. Not as charity or obligation, but as investment in both. Your futures. A structured arrangement with clear terms. Her eyebrows raised slightly. What kind of terms? Tuition and childcare costs covered while you're in school. A modest living stipend. In exchange, you maintain good academic standing and develop a business plan for your eventual design practice. When you graduate, you'll have both your degree and seed funding to launch your business. And what do you get from this arrangement? She asked, though her tone held curiosity rather than suspicion. The satisfaction of seeing you both thrive independently, and time with my granddaughter as she grows. I smiled slightly. I'm not getting any younger, Nissa. I'd like to know her. She studied me thoughtfully. You're nothing like I expected, Ilara. When Alaric described you, it was always as this controlling, judgmental presence he had to manage carefully. The tough businesswoman who measured everything by profit margins and success metrics. Perhaps we never really knew each other, I acknowledged. We were both seeing reflections created by Alaric, not the actual people underneath. Perhaps, she agreed. Though I'm beginning to think he never really saw either of us clearly. Just what we could provide or represent. The conversation shifted to practical matters, her upcoming anatomy scan, the apartment lease, her preliminary research into Wellington's program requirements. As she was preparing to leave, she paused at the door. Have you heard anything about him? I shook my head. Nothing concrete. The FBI believes he's in Southeast Asia, possibly Malaysia or Indonesia, using a different name. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Sometimes I wake up convinced he's standing over me, watching. Other times it feels like he never existed, at all, like he was some elaborate fiction we both participated in creating. The observation was surprisingly insightful. Do you miss him? I asked gently. I miss who I thought he was, she replied after a moment's reflection. The charming, brilliant man who seemed to have the world at his fingertips. The man who could make me feel like the center of the universe when he focused his attention on me. Her hand moved to her growing belly. But that person was a performance, wasn't he? A character he created to get what he wanted from everyone around him. Yes, I said quietly. I believe he was. After Nissa left, I wandered through my garden despite the light rain, thinking about performances and identities. Hadn't I also played a role all these years? The successful woman who had it all, career, wealth, family, the mother who could solve any problem with the right strategy and sufficient resources, the mentor who always knew the correct path forward. Reality had proved far messier than any of those carefully constructed narratives. The following week brought an unexpected development. I received a call from Agent Daniels while reviewing quarterly investment reports in my study. Mrs. Blackwood, we've located your son, she said without preamble. He was apprehended attempting to enter New Zealand using a false passport. I set down my pen, my heart suddenly racing. New Zealand? Why would he go there? We're still piecing that together. Preliminary investigation suggests he was meeting with potential investors for yet another fraudulent venture. He had presentation materials for a company called Helix. Innovations, essentially the same concept as Lumina, repackaged. The sheer audacity was staggering. Even as an international fugitive, Alaric couldn't abandon his schemes. What happens now? He's being held by New Zealand authorities pending extradition hearings. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence against him, we expect he'll be returned to U.S. custody within 60 days. At that point, he'll be formally arraigned on multiple federal charges. I see. My voice sounded calm, though internally I felt anything but. Will I need to testify? Most likely, yes, but not for some time. The case preparation will be extensive. After thanking her for the update, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to process this new reality. Alaric captured, extradition, federal charges. A trial where I would testify against my own son. The abstract concepts I'd accepted in principle were now concrete events unfolding in real time. I picked up my phone and called Imogen. I just heard, she said as soon as she answered. Are you all right? I'm not sure, I admitted. It's the outcome I expected, the one I helped create. So why does it feel so devastating? She offered. Because despite everything, he's still your son, the child you raised. Wanting justice doesn't mean you stop loving him, Alara. Did I still love Alaric? The question resounded in my mind. I'd certainly loved the little boy with curious eyes who asked endless questions about how things worked. I'd loved the teenager who built complicated models of molecules in our garage, explaining each bond with enthusiastic detail. I'd even loved the young man who'd stood nervously at his college graduation, searching the crowd until he found my face, then breaking into a relieved smile when our eyes met. But the Alaric who had systematically deceived dozens of people, who had forged my signature, who had physically attacked his pregnant wife, who had fled justice only to continue his fraudulent activities abroad. Did I love that person? I don't know who he is anymore, I finally said. The son I thought I had wouldn't have done these things. People are complex, Alara. Perhaps he's both, the son you remember and the man who committed these crimes. Or perhaps neither was real, I countered. Perhaps both were performances designed to get what he wanted from the people around him. Imogen was quiet for a moment. What will you do now? What I've already been doing. Cooperate with the investigation. Support Nissa through her pregnancy. Prepare for my granddaughter's arrival. I gazed out at my garden, where late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, and try to understand how we got here. Not just Alaric's choices, but mine as, well. That evening, I pulled out old photo albums, pictures of Alaric's childhood, his graduations, family vacations. In each image, he beamed confidently at the camera, already aware of his ability to charm. Had there been signs I'd missed? Warnings I'd ignored? One photo gave me pause. Alaric at 16, standing beside the first car I'd bought him, an expensive sports model that had been wildly impractical and indulgent. I remembered my reasoning at the time. He'd worked hard in school, he deserved a reward. His father had never given him anything. But looking at the image now, I saw something I'd missed before. Not gratitude in his expression, but entitlement. Not joy at an unexpected gift, but satisfaction at a successfully executed strategy. The phone call came just after midnight. I fumbled for it in the darkness, heart pounding with the irrational fear that always accompanies late-night calls. Mrs. Blackwood? An unfamiliar voice, official-sounding despite the hour. This is Deputy Warden Morales from Auckland Central Remand Prison. I'm calling regarding your son, Alaric Blackwood. My throat tightened. Has something happened? I'm afraid there's been an incident. Mr. Blackwood was found unresponsive in his cell approximately 2 hours ago. Despite resuscitation efforts, he was pronounced dead at 11:37 p.m. local time. The words seemed to come from very far away, their meaning unclear at first. Dead? How? Was he ill? Preliminary investigation indicates suicide. A detailed inquiry is underway, but initial evidence suggests he ingested a substance smuggled into the facility. I'm very sorry for your loss, ma'am. I sat up, switching on the bedside lamp. The familiar contours of my bedroom seemed suddenly strange, as if I were seeing them from a great distance. Are you certain it's him, Alaric? Has used false identities before. His identity has been confirmed through fingerprint matching against FBI records. We're still conducting standard protocols, including DNA verification. But there's little doubt. After gathering what additional information I could, which wasn't much, I ended the call and sat motionless in my bed. Cervantes nudged my hand, with his nose, whining softly at my obvious distress. My son was dead. The brilliant, troubled, manipulative, charismatic man who had brought both joy and devastation to my life was gone. Not after a long legal process, not with the possibility of redemption or reconciliation someday in the distant future, but suddenly, irrevocably, by his own hand. I should call Nisa, I thought distantly, and Imogen. The FBI would need to be notified. Arrangements would have to be made for… What? Repatriation of his body? A funeral? The practical concerns seemed trivial compared to the hollow ache expanding in my chest. Dawn found me still sitting upright in bed. Cervantes curled. Against my side, photos of Alaric scattered across the covers. Outside my window, the first birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the fracture that had just occurred in my world. My son was gone, and with him, any possibility of answers, explanations, or eventual understanding. The New Zealand authorities released Alaric's body 3 weeks later. I arranged for cremation rather than repatriation, a decision that felt both practical and symbolic. After all, the man I had known as my son had disappeared long before his physical form. What remained now was only the shell that had housed his brilliant, troubled spirit. When the small wooden box containing his ashes arrived at my home, I placed it on the mantel temporarily, unsure of what final disposition would be appropriate. There it sat, a mute testament to a life ended too soon, to potential squandered, to questions that would forever remain unanswered. The official investigation confirmed suicide. Alaric had somehow obtained a lethal combination of drugs, likely through the same network of criminal connections he'd utilized to flee the country. A brief note was found, addressed simply to those concerned. It read, "The game has reached its natural conclusion. Some players are not meant to be captured." No personal messages, no expressions of remorse, no final words for me or for Nissa or for the child he would never meet. Just a cold assessment of his circumstances as if his life had been nothing more than an elaborate chess match. The FBI's investigation continued despite his death. The extent of his fraudulent activities proved even more extensive than initially suspected, spanning nearly a decade and involving shell companies across multiple countries. Agent Daniels visited me at Rose Hill one afternoon in early August, bringing files documenting the elaborate web Alaric had constructed. "We've located approximately 60% of the misappropriated funds," she explained, spreading documents across my dining table. "The rest appears to have been spent on maintaining his lifestyle or transferred to accounts we haven't yet identified." I studied the complex flowcharts tracing money movements between entities with exotic-sounding names: Azure Horizon Holdings, Quantum Vista Partners, Meridian Ascent Group. The last one made me pause. "He named one after my company," I noted. Agent Daniels nodded. "We've found several instances where he deliberately utilized elements of your business history to lend credibility to his schemes. References to your patents, modifications of your corporate structure, even testimonials attributed to your former executives, though most appear to be fabricated." The calculated nature of it all felt like a fresh wound. Not content with taking my financial support, Alaric had appropriated my life's work, twisting it to serve his deceptions. "Several victims have inquired about civil recovery," she continued carefully. "They're aware of your resources and your relationship to Alaric. They want me to cover his debts," I translated, not entirely surprised, even though I was a victim myself. "Some have suggested that your support over the years enabled his activities, yes. Their attorneys are exploring whether that creates any liability." She held up a hand at my expression. "I'm not saying they have a case, just that you should be prepared." I was prepared. Imogen had already warned me of this possibility and had assembled a legal team specializing in financial fraud defense. What I wasn't prepared for was the emotional toll of seeing my son's entire adult life reduced to a criminal investigation, a paper trail of deception, manipulation, and calculated cruelty. "There's one more thing," Agent Daniels said, extracting a final folder from her briefcase. We found this in a safe deposit box in Singapore. It appears to be a journal of sorts, though not a traditional diary. More like notes to himself about strategies and observations. She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a slim, leather-bound notebook filled with Alaric's distinctive handwriting, precise, slightly slanted, with sharp, angular letters that seemed to capture his personality perfectly. "Is this evidence?" I asked, not touching it. "We've digitized the relevant portions for our investigation. This appears to be personal rather than operational. I thought you might want it." After she left, I sat with the notebook before me for nearly an hour before finding the courage to open it. The first entry was dated 12 years earlier, around the time Alaric had graduated from business school. "Mother's weakness is predictable," it began without preamble. "Guilt over working during my childhood creates a reliable pattern of overcompensation. Increased financial requests should be coupled with references to finally building something meaningful or creating a legacy worthy of her example. Physical touches, hand on arm, brief hug, increase success rate by approximately 30%. My hand trembled as I turned the page. Entry after entry detailed his observations about manipulating people, not just me, but professors, girlfriends, business associates, investors. He cataloged their vulnerabilities with clinical detachment, noting which approaches yielded the best results, which emotional triggers were most effective. N responds well to implied exclusivity, he'd written about Nissa during their early relationship. Creates impression of private world others can't access. Maintain artificial scarcity of attention to maximize impact when focused on her. Strategic gifts timed to moments of doubt reinforce pattern of unpredictable reward. It was like reading an anthropologist's field notes, except the subjects were people who had loved and trusted him, and the observations were weaponized to serve his purposes. The most recent entries dealt with his escape plans. Methodical. Detailed contingencies for evading capture, accessing emergency funds, establishing new identities. He'd prepared for every possibility except the one that ultimately befell him, being caught despite his elaborate precautions. As darkness fell, outside my windows I closed the notebook, feeling strangely hollow. The man described in these pages, calculating, manipulative, viewing human connections purely as strategic assets, bore little resemblance to the son I thought I'd raised. Yet the evidence of his true nature was undeniable, written in his own, and I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it out to my garden terrace. The August evening was warm and fragrant with late-blooming roses. Fireflies blinked in the deepening twilight, their ephemeral lights appearing and disappearing like brief moments of clarity in an otherwise confusing existence. My phone chimed with a text from Nisa. "Ultrasound tomorrow at 11. Would you like to come?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I'll meet you there." 26 weeks into her pregnancy, Nisa had settled into a kind of cautious optimism about her future. The revelation of Alaric's death had affected her strangely, not with grief exactly, but with a mixture of relief and disorientation. "It's like waking up from an intense dream," she'd said when I told her. "Everything that seemed so urgent and significant suddenly isn't." The next morning, I met her at the Women's Health Center, where we watched together as the ultrasound technician captured images of my granddaughter, her perfect spine curving gently, tiny hands opening and closing, the miraculous 4 chambers of her heart beating steadily. "Would you like to know the measurements?" the technician asked, moving the wand across Nisa's rounded belly. "Everything looks right on track for 26 weeks. As she recited numbers, femur length, head, circumference, estimated weight, I found myself thinking about how we measure a life. Alaric had measured his in acquisitions, in successful manipulations, in elaborate schemes executed. I had measured mine in professional achievements, in wealth accumulated, in problems solved. But perhaps those weren't the measurements that truly mattered. After the appointment, Nissa and I walked to a nearby cafe for lunch. She moved more slowly now, one hand resting on the curve of her abdomen, the other occasionally touching her lower back to ease the discomfort of shifting. Balance. "Have you decided on a name?" I asked as we settled at an outdoor table beneath a striped awning. "I'm considering Lyra," she replied, adjusting her position to accommodate her changing body. "It means the harp in Latin. It's a constellation of stars." She smiled slightly. I like the musical connection, and the idea that even in darkness, there are patterns of light to guide us. "Lyra," I repeated, testing the sound. "It's beautiful, strong but gentle. Like I hope she'll be." Nisa stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about how to tell her about her father someday. What to say when she inevitably asks." It was a question I'd been pondering as well. How do you explain a man like Alaric to the child who will carry his genetic legacy, but never know his touch? "I think," I said carefully, "that you tell her the truth, in age-appropriate ways. That her father was brilliant and charismatic, but made choices that hurt people. That she comes from him, but isn't defined by him." Nissa nodded. "And that she has a family who loves her regardless of where she came from." She looked up at me. "You will be part of her life, won't you? Not just financially, but really present?" "As much as you'll allow me to be," I promised. "Though I recognize I have my own patterns to break, my own lessons to learn about what real presence means." The conversation shifted to practical matters. The nursery Nissa was planning for her apartment, her upcoming enrollment at Wellington, a pregnancy yoga class she'd joined. Ordinary concerns of an expectant mother preparing for new life, not the aftermath of fraud and betrayal that had defined our interactions months earlier. When we parted that afternoon, she surprised me with a brief hug. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me as more than just an extension of him." Walking back to my car, I reflected on her words. How often had I done the same with Alaric, seen him primarily as an extension of myself, of my ambitions and expectations? Had I ever truly seen him as a separate person with his own authentic nature, not just the idealized son I wanted him to be? The questions followed me home, where Cervante greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, oblivious to the complexities of human relationships. I took him for a walk around the property, letting him sniff and explore while I continued my internal inventory. For years, I'd measured my success as a mother by Alaric's achievements, his grades, his college acceptance, his business ventures. I'd poured resources into his endeavors without questioning whether they aligned with genuine talent or merely fed his appetite for more. I'd substituted financial support for the harder work of honest communication and appropriate boundaries. And when he'd faltered, I'd seen it as a reflection on my parenting rather than a consequence of his own choices. I'd stepped in to fix problems that perhaps should have been left for him to resolve, denied him the growth that comes from facing natural consequences. Had I enabled his worst tendencies? Certainly. Had I created them? That was less clear. Nature and nurture intertwine in ways too complex to untangle completely. Some seeds flourish in any soil, others require specific conditions to either bloom or wither. As evening approached, I returned to my study where Alaric's ashes and journal still sat on my desk, twin reminders of a life gone astray. What was I to do with these remnants? There would be no funeral. Too many of those who knew him were now his victims. No memorial service celebrating achievements built on deception. I opened the journal again, turning to the final entry, written just days before his arrest in New Zealand. The handwriting was more hurried than his usual precise script, the words slanting sharply across the page. "Mother has finally shown her true colors," he'd written. "All the years of pretending to support my vision, only to betray me when it matters most." Her sanctimony is laughable, as if her pharmaceutical empire wasn't built on the same principles of calculated risk and creative representation of facts. The only difference is she never got caught. I closed the book, a profound sadness washing over me. Even at the end, he'd been unable to recognize the fundamental distinction between building something of genuine value and creating elaborate facades, between taking business risks and perpetrating fraud, between imperfection and criminality. And perhaps that was the true tragedy of Alaric's life, not just the harm he'd caused others, but his inability to discern authentic worth from surface appearance, real connection from strategic manipulation. That night, I dreamed of Alaric as a child, building an elaborate sandcastle at the beach. In the dream, I watched as he meticulously crafted towers and battlements, moats and bridges, his small face intent with concentration. When the tide began to rise, threatening his creation, he frantically built walls to hold back the inevitable, refusing to acknowledge the temporary nature of his work. "Let it go," I urged in the dream. "We can build another one tomorrow, on higher ground." But he wouldn't listen, becoming increasingly desperate as the waves approached, until finally the entire structure collapsed beneath the relentless water, leaving nothing but smooth sand where his castle had stood. I woke with tears on my face and a strange sense of clarity. Alaric's life, and my relationship with him, had been built on shifting sand, elaborate constructions that could not withstand the tide of truth. Now that they had washed away, perhaps something more authentic could be built on firmer ground. The morning brought a call from Imogen. "The first civil suits have been filed," she informed me. 3 investors naming you as a co-defendant, claiming negligence for not recognizing and reporting Alaric's fraudulent activities sooner. "Can they prove I knew or should have known?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "Not likely, but they're hoping for a settlement rather than protracted litigation. It's a common strategy in these cases. Sue the deepest pockets connected to the principal defendant." "What do you recommend?" She hesitated. "From a purely legal perspective, fight it. You have strong defenses and documentation of your own. Victimization. From a practical and emotional standpoint, a structured settlement might allow you to close this chapter more quickly, though it would be substantial." "How substantial?" "Preliminary estimates suggest around $3 million total across all potential claimants." The sum was significant, but not devastating to my financial situation. More importantly, it represented a choice: fight for years to prove my innocence, or accept a measure of responsibility, warranted or not, and help make Alaric's victims whole. Draft settlement terms, I decided, but with conditions. The funds go into a victim restitution trust, not directly to the litigants. And I want transparent verification that the money reaches those who were actually harmed, not just the attorneys or the most aggressive claimants. "Are you sure?" Imogen asked. "This could be interpreted as an admission of culpability." "I'm not concerned with interpretations. I'm concerned with ending a cycle of harm." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "The truth is, I did fail, Imogen. Not in the legal sense they're claiming, but in a more fundamental way. I had opportunities to see who Alaric really was, to set boundaries that might have limited the damage he could cause. Instead, I enabled patterns that eventually harmed many people. After we hung up, I fed Cervantes and then wandered into my garden with a cup of coffee. The morning sunlight filtered through the maple trees, creating dappled patterns on the stone pathway. In a few months, Lyra would be born into this complicated legacy, carrying Alaric's DNA but not his choices, connected to a grandmother who had made her own share of mistakes. What would I teach her about money and worth, about integrity and success, about the difference between appearance and substance? The questions felt weightier now, knowing I had a second chance to get it right. That afternoon, I made 2 decisions. First, I contacted a wealth management specialist about establishing a trust for Lyra. Not an outright inheritance that might foster entitlement, but a structured fund for education, healthcare, and eventually seed capital for her own endeavors, provided she demonstrated responsibility and purpose. Second, I took Alaric's ashes to the small lake at the edge of my property. No ceremony seemed appropriate, no words adequate to encompass the complexity of our relationship. Instead, I simply opened the box and scattered the gray dust across the water's surface. The particles floated briefly, then slowly sank beneath the gentle ripples, returning to the elements from which they came. The journal I kept, not as a monument to manipulation, but as a cautionary record of what happens when brilliance becomes untethered from empathy, when success is measured only in acquisitions rather than connections, when life becomes a game, to win rather than a journey to share. September brought cooler temperatures and preparation for transition. Nisa enrolled in her architectural design program, moved to a more suitable apartment closer to campus, and began transforming a small, second bedroom into a nursery. I found myself increasingly involved in these practical aspects of anticipating Lyra's arrival, researching safety ratings on car seats, accompanying Nisa to childbirth education classes as her support person, helping to assemble furniture for the nursery on weekends. These ordinary tasks felt unexpectedly meaningful, grounding me in a way that my previous achievement-oriented life had not. There was something profound in the simplicity of preparing for new life, a direct connection to what truly matters that had often eluded me in boardrooms and business negotiations. One evening, as Nisa and I finished painting the nursery walls, a soft sea green color, she paused, brush in hand, and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know what's strange?" she said. "For years, I defined myself primarily as Alaric's wife, the perfect partner, the elegant hostess, the supportive spouse. I thought that was the role that gave me value." She made a final brushstroke along the baseboard. "But now, preparing to be a mother, going back to school, rebuilding my life without him, I feel more real than I ever did before. More substantial." I understood exactly what she meant. As if you're finally the protagonist in your own story, not a supporting character in someone else's. Exactly. She set down her brush and stretched her back, now prominently curved with her third trimester. Pregnancy. I think about Lyra, and I want her to know from the beginning that she's the author of her own life. That her value isn't measured by how well she performs for others or what she accumulates. A wisdom that took both of us far too long to learn, I observed. She nodded, resting her paint-speckled hands on her belly as Lyra shifted position inside her. Better late than never, though, and maybe that's the gift we can give her, the lessons we learned the hard way. As October drew to a close, bringing brilliant fall colors to the trees surrounding Rose Hill, Agent Daniels made a final visit. The FBI had concluded its investigation, recovering nearly $5 million of the misappropriated funds and identifying all of Alaric's known victims. "The case is officially closed," she told me as we walked the grounds, fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet, though some of the civil litigation will likely continue for years. "And the victims? How many were there in total?" 34 individuals and 4 institutional investors. Most will receive partial recovery through asset seizures and your settlement contribution." She paused beside an ancient oak tree, its branches now nearly bare against the autumn sky. "I've worked financial fraud cases for 15 years, Mrs. Blackwood." Usually by this point, family members are still in denial, still defending the perpetrator, still claiming there must be some misunderstanding. "I passed through that stage," I admitted. "But the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. It takes courage to accept difficult truths, especially about those we love." She hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, how are you doing now, with all of this?" The question was unexpectedly personal coming from the typically professional agent. I considered it seriously before answering. "I'm learning to separate grief from guilt," I said finally. "To mourn the son I thought I had, while accepting that the man he became was shaped by his own choices as well as my failures. To recognize that loving someone doesn't mean excusing or enabling their worst behaviors." I glanced toward the house, where photos from happier times still sat on shelves and mantels. And I'm trying to focus on the future rather than the past. My granddaughter will be born next month. She represents a new beginning, a chance to apply the wisdom gained through painful experience. Agent Daniels nodded. That's a healthy perspective. Not everyone finds their way there. As she prepared to leave, she offered one final observation. In my experience, those who cause the greatest harm are often those with the greatest potential for good. The same intelligence, charisma, and drive that Alaric used destructively could have created something genuinely valuable under different circumstances. "I believe that," I said quietly. "I've always believed that." November 12th dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline autumn day that feels like a gift before winter's arrival. I was in my study reviewing Nisa's most recent architectural design project, a community center with innovative, sustainable features, when my phone rang. "It's time," Nisa said without preamble, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "My water broke an hour ago. Contractions are about 7 minutes apart." "I'll be right there," I promised, already moving toward the door. The labor progressed swiftly for a first-time mother. By mid-afternoon, Nisa was fully dilated, working. With focused determination through each contraction as I provided encouragement and support at her side. The medical team marveled at her composure, unaware of how well her months of emotional challenges had prepared her for this physical test. At 5:17 p.m., Lyra Elaine Blackwood entered the world with a powerful cry, her tiny fists clenched as if ready to take on life's challenges from her very first breath. When the nurse placed her in Nisa's arms, I witnessed a transformation I'll never forget. The carefully maintained composure that had defined my daughter-in-law dissolved into raw, unguarded emotion. "Hello, little one," Nisa whispered, tears flowing freely down her flushed cheeks. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." I stood beside them, overwhelmed by the perfection of this new life. The delicate fingers with impossibly tiny nails, the rosebud mouth that already showed hints of Nisa's shape, the dark wisps of hair that might someday lighten to Alaric's golden brown. "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" Nisa asked, looking up at me with an expression of open vulnerability I'd never seen before. When Lyra was placed in my arms, something shifted in my heart, a sensation of pieces clicking into place, of a circle completed. This small being, 7 pounds of pure potential, represented both an ending and a beginning. The conclusion of one chapter in my family's story and the opening of another with blank pages yet to be filled. "Welcome to the world, Lyra," I murmured, gently stroking her velvet cheek. "It's not a perfect place, but it's full of wonder and possibility, and you are so very loved." In that moment, cradling new life in the midst of a journey marked by loss and revelation, I understood something fundamental about the nature of redemption. It doesn't erase the past or undo mistakes made. It doesn't provide easy answers to complex questions of responsibility and consequence. But it does offer the profound grace of beginning again, of applying hard-won wisdom to create something better than what came before. As twilight gathered outside the hospital windows, I gazed down at Lyra's peaceful sleeping face and made a silent promise. I would help guide her with the balance I'd failed to achieve with Alaric, supporting without enabling, loving without idealizing, seeing her for who she truly was rather than who I needed her to be. And perhaps in doing so, I would finally answer the question that had haunted me since that fateful spring day when I canceled the payment on my son's business loan and set in motion the unraveling of a lifetime of deception. Not, "Where did I go wrong?" but rather, how can I now do right? Lyra stirred in my arms, her eyes opening briefly. Dark newborn blue that might someday shift to green like her father's, or perhaps remain the deep color that hinted at Nissa's heritage. In that momentary gaze, I felt an unexpected connection, across time, to my own mother, to the generations before her, to the women who would come after Lyra herself. We are all links in a chain, I thought, each shaped by those who came before, each influencing those who follow. The chain had been damaged in my lifetime, weakened by patterns of entitlement and deception. But it hadn't broken completely. And now, holding this new beginning in my arms, I understood that while we cannot change the past, we can always choose to forge stronger links for the future. "You're going to be extraordinary," I whispered to my granddaughter as she drifted back to sleep. "Not because of what you achieve or acquire, but because of who you are. And we'll be here to remind you of that truth every step of the way." Outside the hospital window, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky. Among them, invisible in the city's glow but present nonetheless, was Lyra's namesake constellation, a small but perfect pattern of light guiding travelers through the darkness, just as this tiny girl would now guide us toward a more authentic future built on firmer ground than shifting sand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.